Next topic is namespaces, XML namespaces. So here we are going to talk about the need for namespaces, why namespaces is needed for XML, and then we are going to see the syntax of namespace, and we'll talk about the concept of default namespace, and then we'll talk about the concept of target namespace along with source namespace, and then we'll talk about how to import XML schema with the schema location. So let's talk about the need for XML namespaces. So if you have written any Java programs, you know there is a concept of package, and package in Java programming space provides the namespaces so that there is no collision. Even though you have classes, they might have the same name because they belong to different packages. There is no possibility of collision, and that's the same reason why we want to have XML namespaces. So XML document could use multiple XML vocabularies, meaning XML elements and attributes, and there could be possibility of name collision. Okay. For example, XHTML document might contain XML elements from both SVG and MathML, and in fact both SVG and MathML has set element. And cell element used in SVG is different. I mean, it should be semantically different. It is semantically different from a set in MathML. So there is a possibility of name collision like this. So we need to avoid this name collision through the use of namespace. So this is an example where element called the title have the name collision. Okay, so this is RDF file, and we have, in this case, in the RDF file, title is basically title of the web page. Now in the painting, so we have another title. So this is the title of the painting. So this title and the title in the previous slide, they actually mean different things. Okay, so that is an example of name collision. So if you are not using namespaces, one way you can do is changing element name to avoid. Okay, but this is not a convenient option, especially if you are not the owner of that element. Some collisions are inevitable because they are defined by standard bodies. For example, SVG is a standard and MathML is a standard, and both the standards define a set element as one of the valid elements. So if you're using SVG's set and MathML set in the same XML document, then there is no way that you are going to avoid name collision. And the grouping names is useful anyway. So for example, XSLT processor needs to know which are the XSLT instructions and which are result tree elements. So don't worry about these things. We are going to actually talk about XSLT in detail later on. So in general, grouping names is useful anyway. In the same way, grouping Java classes into a package is useful. Okay, so pretty much the same reason that we have the packaging on the Java, we have the same need for XML. All right, so so this is a case that we are using namespaces in the same example that we have seen. So as you are going to learn later on, this is the way that you define your namespaces. So here we define RDF namespaces like this. Okay, and then we also define another the namespace here. Okay, the namespace is actually reflected through what is called the prefix, and each element will have this prefix. So this title belongs to a namespace defined with this prefix DC here, and anything that start with the RDF, this description, and I think that's the only one here, this description element belongs to this RDF namespace. Okay, all right, so let's move on to understanding the syntax of namespace. So namespace is made of two parts. One is namespace declaration, and then the elements and attributes are going to use this namespace. So namespace declaration is made of this syntax: XML NS keyword, colon, and prefix. And this prefix is basically reflecting a URI. So this is an example where we are declaring a namespace. So this is the namespace. The syntax of namespace is in the form of URI, okay? But it doesn't have to be resolved in a real URI. It doesn't have to be a valid URI. It just happened to be the value, the syntax they decide to use as a value of the namespace, okay? All right, so this prefix is user defined, meaning you can use any name of your choice. I decide to use XML class in this case. However, XML NS, this is a keyword. Okay, so here by saying this, what you're saying is that I'm declaring a namespace whose value is this URI form, and then any elements and attributes that belongs to this namespace is going to use this prefix. Okay, because usage of this long URI is very inconvenient. The reason the prefix is used is to reflect. This is, you can think of, is like an alias of this namespace. Okay, so any attributes and elements that belong to this namespace should use that prefix. Okay, so namespace can be declared in a root element or low-level element. In fact, you can declare namespaces in any level in your XML document. In fact, multiple different namespaces could be defined in a single document. So that is an example that we have seen here. So we define two namespaces here, okay, here and here. Okay, we'll see more examples of this one moving forward. Some prefix can be redefined within a same document. Okay, so you can use the same prefix XYZ in multiple levels, even though this is not recommended practice. It causes some confusion. However, syntax-wise is allowed. Okay, what that means is that the scope of namespace declaration is within the element where it is defined. Let me explain what that means. Okay, so let me actually use this example. So this is one namespace declaration, right? So here it's defined on an element. So this element belongs to this namespace. That's the reason it's using its namespace right here. Same thing here. So we are defining namespace of this, and this element belongs to this namespace. So in this case, this is actually belong to this description belongs over here, but everything inside belongs to this namespace. Anything that actually starts with a DC belongs to this namespace. Okay, all right. So the examples of namespace usage here. This is a prefix and this is an element. So this is the SVG namespace and this is the element. This is mathml prefix and this is an element. So these names could be anything you want, even though SVG, the convention is using SVG, and mathml convention is using mathml. So the syntax is a prefix colon local part. Okay, local part meaning element or attribute, and so together it is named together. It makes up what is called the qualified name. Okay, so in web services, if you actually hear qualified name, that means it's combination of this prefix and local part. So prefix can be composed from any XML name character except colon. And XML is reserved, so you cannot use XML as a prefix. Okay, local part also cannot contain colon. So namespace URI. So URI cannot be a prefix. Okay, and these characters slash, %, and tilde are not legal in XML element names, so you cannot use them. And URI could be standardized. So industry organizations, as you are going to see later on, like a SOAP standard or WSDL standard, they actually defined the namespaces as part of their standard. So SOAP has a set of namespaces and WSDL has a set of namespaces, and Web Services Security Specification has a set of namespaces. Okay, so as I said before, these URIs are just identifiers. So it doesn't have to be in HTTP form, even though this is typically the case, and URI does not have to be resolved. So you can think of it more or less constant value happen to be the taking the syntax of URI. Okay, moving forward. The concept of default namespace. Default namespace is declared with XML and then XML NS attribute with no prefix. Okay, so it's applied only to unprefixed element and its descendant element. So let me explain default namespace using an example. So having prefix in many elements in your XML document is a chore. Okay, so if you happen to have an XML document where most of the elements belong to a particular namespace, you might want to actually use a default namespace. So this is a case. This is XML document, and you don't actually see a prefix in your XML document, even though XML document is supposed to be a valid XML document, right? The reason is because it's using default namespace. Default namespace is a namespace without any prefix. Okay, so in this case, and any element which doesn't have a prefix belongs to this namespace. So in this case, any element which doesn't have a prefix, in this case HTML, head, title, body, H1, and then P and HR. So these guys all belong to this namespace, default namespace. Okay. However, there could be only a single default namespace. So any other namespaces, in this case xlink, has to have a prefix. So if you are using an element, an attribute that belongs to this namespace, then you have to use xlink. So let's see if you have any attribute here. So this href attribute and the type attribute here belongs to this namespace. So you have to have a prefix of xlink. Okay, here. All right. Now we have another example of default namespace. So if you happen to have a sub-element in which you are going to use a lot of elements that belong to this namespace, in this case SVG namespace, like eclipse, rect, or width and height, then you might want to declare another default namespace, and this default namespace is valid only within this SVG here. Okay, so any element inside this SVG element, SVG, width, height, eclipse, RX, RY, X and Y, width, height, these all belongs to this default namespace. Okay, you can certainly actually not use a name, default, not use the default namespace. For example, you can actually have a prefix here, like XML NS colon SVG. In that case, everything should be prefixed with the SVG. So this one should be SVG colon SVG. This one should be SVG colon width. This one should be SVG colon height. Okay, but that's more typing, right? So in that case, you might want to use the default namespace rather than explicit namespace. Okay, example XML document. So this is the pom.xml file of Maven. So this is a genuine XML document. So you can see examples of namespaces. Okay, so again, for elements that belong to Maven namespace, so this is a Maven namespace, right? So here you define a default namespace. So any element like a project, model version, properties, they all belong to this default namespace. Okay, so you don't have to actually have a prefix for this these elements. Okay, anything else? This one, anything that belongs to this XML schema instances has to have XSI namespace. Anything that belongs to this schema location namespace, XSD namespace. Oh, this is the schema location. It's not really a namespace things. Okay, right. Anything, let's see if there is an XSI namespace element that are being used here. Looks like it doesn't. Okay. All right. So this is another example where default namespace is used. This is a WSDL document. Here we have let's see that there is no. Oh yeah. So here, this is the default namespace. So anything that doesn't have a prefix belongs to this WSDL namespace. For example, definitions, types, and the message, port type, binding, they all belong to this default namespace. Any elements and attributes that belong to other namespaces need to have a prefix. So for example, this is the case where this schema element belongs to XSD namespace. So this is the namespace that we defined. So this is XML namespace, XML schema namespace. Okay, so like a schema and import, those elements should be prefixed with the XXD because they do not belong to this default namespace. Okay, the SOAP, so this is the SOAP namespace. So anything, any element and attributes that belong to this SOAP namespace should be prefixed with this SOAP. Okay, so that is this case, SOAP colon operation. So this operation element belongs to this namespace. Okay. All right, schema namespace. So let me actually stop right here and see if there are any questions. Okay, so let me okay, so schema namespaces. So types of namespaces. There is actually a concept of target namespace and source namespaces. And the target namespace is the namespace for XML schema document itself. Okay, so I'm going to explain what it means using an example in the following slide. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. Source namespaces are namespaces external to XML schema documents. So these are typical namespaces that we have seen so far. So when we actually see these namespaces, these are all the source namespaces, meaning this defines the namespaces that you are going to use elements from those namespaces. Okay, so that is typical the namespaces we are talking about. Okay, all right. So target namespace, as I said before, it is a namespace that is going to be assigned to the schema that you are going to create. So we haven't actually seen the schema yet. We have seen XML document instance, but we haven't seen the XML schema that defines the syntax of those XML document instances. So when you are creating XML schema in which you are going to define elements and attributes, you have to provide a namespace, right? That is the target namespace. So the names of elements and attributes defined in a schema are said to belong to its target namespace. Okay. Again, if you are confused about the concept, don't worry about it. I'm going to use an example to emphasize this aspect. Okay. It is a namespace a document instance uses to access the types it declares. Okay, so what it means is this. So in this case, these are source namespaces, right? Meaning they actually provide the namespace these elements that you're using belongs to. However, when you're creating XML schema of these names, the schema of this particular namespace, XML schema, that is the target namespace that needs to be defined for that, right? I mean, okay, so maybe I'm actually confusing you. So let me actually move on to a different example, and you will actually have a better understanding once I use example later on. So each schema has one target namespace and possibly many source namespaces. Okay, all right. Just remember this, and I'm going to actually use an example. All right, so I'm going to use an example. This is a sample schema. So again, we haven't really learned the concept of schema. A schema is where you are defining your own elements. Okay, so in this case, we have defined XML schema, and this is a target namespace. So this is the namespace. These guys, you are defining these elements, element and simple type restriction. I'm sorry, the ones that you are defining. So this is you are defining 3 elements here: invoice number, product, and product code. So these are the elements that you are defining in your XML schema, so that somebody else can actually use it. Now, before these elements could be used by XML document instance of this XML schema, you have to provide target namespace. Okay, so this target namespace is going to be used in XML document instance when they're actually using these elements. Okay. I'm going to actually talk about this example one more time when we actually cover XML schema. So we haven't really talked about XML schema yet, so it might be a little bit premature for me to talk about this concept yet. But let me actually repeat this one later on when we talk about XML schema. All right. So this is an explanation. So the target namespace name is this. Okay, so this is a target namespace. Okay, and which contains invoice number, product ID, and product code names in the namespace. So when we are defining, these three elements, okay, so these elements are belonging to this target namespace that I define. Okay. Now, schema, this red colored things, schema, element, simple type, pattern, string, positive integer, they belong to source namespace of this guy. So XML schema itself is XML document, so it actually has to follow exactly the same rules that any XML document has to follow, meaning it does have its own namespaces. So here it does define the source namespace, okay, or external namespace. So anything that belongs to this namespace, XML schema, has to be prefixed with XSD. So this element, simple type, restriction, and pattern, they all belong to this XML schema namespace. So this is an example of source namespace. Okay. Now this is another example of source namespace, right? But you can see these are the same thing. Target namespace and this one. And we are going to actually talk about that in the following slide. So the target namespace also happens to be one of the source namespaces because the name product code is used in defining others. Now, in this case, when we are defining product element, we happen to use another simple type in this document, in this case product code, right? So what we are doing in this case is that we are actually using product code as source namespace. Okay, so that's the reason we actually define another source namespace or external namespace using ACC. Okay, and but they happen to be the same. Okay, because this product code is in the same namespace. All right, importing a schema with a schema location. Now this is example. This is the same schema with no schema location. So there is no schema information here, okay, because this is the schema itself. Okay, so that is the explanation. Why schema? Now, what is a schema location? Is a schema file uses several source namespaces, but how does it know where to get the schema files of source namespaces? So here we are using these two source namespaces, okay, which means there has to be some XML schema document reflecting, defining elements defined in these namespaces, but we don't see any schema location of these two. Why? Okay, the reason is this. So example 2, same schema in example 1, does not need to specify locations of source schema files. The reason is this schema, this external namespace is well known, the namespace. Okay, so there is no any XML parser knows where to go to get the schema file of this. Okay, so there is no need to actually specify it. And this one, because it's actually in the same namespace, you can see this is the same namespace, so it knows where to go because it's inside the same XML schema file. Okay, so basically that's the reason you don't have to specify schema location. Okay, so this is an explanation. So for the overall schema of schemas, so this is the schema of schemas. You need not specify location because it's well known, meaning every parser should know where to get the schema of that particular namespace. And for the source namespace of this, you do not need to specify a location since it also happens to be the same of the target name of the target namespace that is being defined in this file. So it knows where to go because it's the same file. Okay. However, suppose if you are using another namespace, in this case, so we are using another namespace. This is a custom namespace called the partnerstore.com parts catalog. Okay, and we define this source namespace. Now this is, you have to actually provide the schema file, okay, using the schema location. Okay, all right, because you have to provide a schema file for this particular namespace. Okay, so that is an explanation. So part namespace needs to be imported using import declaration element whose schema location attribute specifies the location of the file it contains the schema, because it is not a well-known namespace like XML schema, and it is not a target namespace. Okay. Alright, so hopefully that gives you a sense of what the schema namespace is all about. I'm going to actually cover this one more time after we cover schema, XML schema. Okay, so if you are a little bit fuzzy on this concept, don't worry about it. In the meantime, let's see if we have any questions before we go to the lab exercise. So alright, so this is the documentation, and here we are going to create XML document from purchase order XSD schema, and then we are going to create XML document from Maven POM schema. Okay, so the start NetBeans. Okay, so you can use any version of NetBeans. I expect you guys to use the latest version, which is 7.4. Okay. You want to open dummy Java application NetBeans project. So this is just dummy project in which we are going to just create the XML files. Okay, so the project is already provided. So all you have to do is just open the project. Okay, so basically you are going to open the project. So let me just file, open project. And it's on the samples directory. So go to the same hands-on lab. In this case, it is hands-on lab. Okay, so in my case, so it is WS XML namespace, and underneath there is the samples NetBeans directory, right? So just open this dummy Java app. Open the project like this. Okay. And we are going to see dummy Java app being displayed. Okay, and there are two XSD files, meaning XML schema files. So if you take a look at the purchase order.xml file, okay, so if you take a look at the here purchase order.xml file, so this is XML schema file. Okay, and then you can see it does have the namespaces of XML schema. Here it does have a prefix. So any elements or attributes that belongs to XML schema should be prefixed with this guy. Okay, so annotation, documentation, and things like that, and element and all that stuff. Okay, now let's see if there is any the XML schema has to have a target namespace. So basically, any XML schema has to have a single target namespace and multiple source namespaces. So here we have two source namespaces, this guy and this guy. Okay, and one single target namespace, this guy. So any elements that we are defining, like the purchase order, ship to, and the name, street, and all these things, they belong to this target namespace. Okay, so when XML document instance is actually using these elements, like a name, ship to, purchase order, they have to specify this guy as one of their source namespaces. Okay. All right, so here we are going to actually create the XML document. So you say new XML document, and just name it as my purchase order XML document. Okay, and we're going to actually specify XML schema constraint document. Okay, and we provide XML schema. Okay, and then we are going to use one or more. So here we are going to actually this is the root. Yeah, so basically we actually use the root and prefix. So this is the namespace that we are going to use in our XML document instance. Okay, so what happens is now we actually have XML document instance. So here you are going to see it uses it actually uses the schema location, right? And then it's using this guy, purchase order. This is the target namespace that we define in XML schema of this guy, right? But because it's using it, it has to actually import it. I mean, it has to use it as the external or source namespace. Okay, so hopefully you guys actually get the sense of how XML schema and document instance of that XML schema is actually being related through these namespaces. Okay, all right. Exercise 2 is something similar. Okay, so here we are creating the XML document instance. Okay, and next, and basically we basically create the XML document, and again this is the prefix we are going to use. Okay, and this is the namespace of Maven, and here we are going to create again the XML document instance, where you have to actually specify the in this case schema location of this Maven schema XML file. So here you are basically using this guy as the namespace where all the elements that belongs to. So anything that if you're using any elements that belong to this namespace, you have to actually prefix it mypom. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you guys about 15 minutes to try this exercise. Okay.